autonomously. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Irhamna Putri is a conservation program supervisor at Wildlife Rescue Centre Jogja on the island of Java in Indonesia. She's led several conservation and research projects with WRC Jogja, such as the genetics of binturong within Indonesia and a Malayan Giant Turtle ex-situ conservation project. Very excitingly, she has a deep interest towards sustainable and resilient conservation institutions, especially wildlife rescue centres and rehabilitation centres. Dr. Irhamna's talk today will revolve around conservation and welfare challenges faced by a multi-taxon wildlife rescue centre and ways to overcome these challenges. Dr. Irhamna, thank you very much for joining us. If you would like to please share your screen, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Elliot, for the introduction, and just for make it easier, just call me Irna. That's fine. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
I can see your screen.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode yet, but I can see your screen.
Okay. Yeah, I think for better communication and network, I will just turn off my video if that's okay.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, nice to meet you all again. I looked at the names, some of you I might be familiar of, so welcome again, and it's great to see you. And for those this is the first time meeting me, yeah, I hope we can continue to know and be friends in the future. Okay, first of all, I thank for the SARCC and Elliot especially for inviting me to join and present in this event. So today, without further ado, I will just present my presentation, sharing my experience about the sanctuary and rescue center issues, and in more like the organizational perspective. So yeah, to begin with, maybe this is just an outline for my presentation. We might start with what is the wildlife rescue and why we should rescuing wildlife, and also in the category of rescued animals, and also the practical action or steps in wildlife rescue. And then several considerations for rehabilitating wildlife, and also finally challenges faced in overall wildlife rescue, and also with the conclusion. So to begin with, what is actually in the wildlife rescue? Rescue itself is the effort made to ensure the survival of the wildlife and their population through either rehabilitation, release, and or the euthanasia. And also the rehabilitation is actually part of the rescue itself, with the definition of treating and providing the temporary care of the injured, diseased, displaced indigenous animals, and the subsequent release of those healthy animals to the appropriate habitat in the wild. And release itself, as we all know, it's just sending or returning the rescued animals to the appropriate habitat. And euthanasia itself is actually in the act of ending the animal's life with the purpose to relieve the suffering. So back again, the goal of wildlife rehab as part of the wildlife rescue is for a successful return to the wild with the likelihood of the rehabilitated animals to live for the long term or to survive. So this is just a thought about why people like to rescue in the wildlife. First of all is because of the animal welfare concern. And there's also some kind of a feeling about offsetting the impact of us human on species demographic, which is, as we all know, that the species decline generally caused by the anthropogenic actions and factors. So it's like moral and ethical responsibility for us to rescue the wildlife. And also some people might rescue wildlife to control the potential disease outbreak. And also sometimes it also happens where there is a public demand to rescue the wildlife. And also interesting thing is wildlife makes us feel good. And another thing why we do rescue is because of the law enforcement. This is very happening in Asian countries because of the legislation consideration. So considering generally the wild animals, they are the law protected being. And also the reason why rescuing is obviously for the conservation. There is the need to preserve and conserve the species due to the declining population. So when it comes to rescuing wildlife, usually what kind of wildlife you rescued is those that are first injured, sick, orphaned, or stranded, and then confiscated through the law enforcement effort in the context of the illegal wildlife trade and also the illegal ownership, and also sometimes as a result of the wildlife conflict, human wildlife conflict. So this is just the practical actions of how usually the work in the rescue center. So start from the animals coming to the site, and then stabilization of the animals itself, making sure that they're doing okay. And also after that, we proceed to the quarantine period, quarantine step, and then after finishing the quarantine, then there will be a rehabilitation usually. And after rehab, there will be time when we need to assess on their future, or it's usually called as the assessment of the disposal. Usually the disposal will include release or euthanasia, or either put the animals again for the long-term captivity or to the sanctuary. The actors involved in this action of rescuing wildlife are usually the managers of the rescue center itself, and also the veterinarians, animal keepers, biologists too sometimes, and also obviously in the authority. And this is just the example of in more detail what's been done when we rescue the wildlife. So when the animals first came, obviously it called with intake. We need to know about the history of the animal itself and also how they look like. It's called the presentation. And based on the history and the presentation, we would just do the brief initial assessment on how to categorize them. Either they're stable. If they're stable, in a good condition, then we can proceed to the clinical examination or conducting the other diagnostic test. And then there it comes the quarantine period, where after quarantine, we may think either this releasable or not releasable. And then if releasable, then it will undergo the rehabilitation process. Obviously started with the treatment, if it's needed a treatment. And also when it comes to the decision that it's not non-releasable, or with the poor prognosis, I mean, in a very bad condition because there's been multiple physical problems, then there would also be the option of euthanasia. And for those that are in emergency situation, usually they need the emergency stabilization, and there it goes. After they're stable, going through in the same steps again. And for those that are experiencing the emergency condition, but it's unfortunately non-treatable, there is an option to directly euthanize them. And these are just the division of the period within during the rescue of the wildlife, and I mean the stable condition or stabilization until performing clinical exams is usually called as the rest period. So we just give the time for the animal to rest, and then the rest would call the quarantine period. So there are some consideration for rehabilitation as well after going through some series of rescuing and saving stabilization of the wildlife. The first is the legal aspect. We must consider how's their conservation status or their protection status, and also the ethical, and obviously the welfare. Usually it's more for individual animals, and then the conservation significance of the animals, usually taking more, more view or broader view towards how it impacts the population in the wild generally. and also in the health and safety, the resource availability to do the next rehabilitation for the animals. And then here it goes about the challenge issues faced in overall process of rescuing wildlife. The very first challenge is, of course, the animal welfare concern. The most prevalent issue in rescue center is spatial constraints. It includes the size of the space, and then when there is a space, we need to deal with the complex social arrangement for each animals, because not one individual can fit with other individuals. So there it comes a problem of the overcapacity as well sometimes. And there is also a thought about better releasing them rather than to place them in a substandard care. And also there's a difficulty as well to cater the needs for multi-species at one-time rescue. This is especially in the case where in one time we got a confiscation, which includes multiple species, the birds, the reptiles, primates, mammals, all in one time. And we need to deal with them at one time. It's obviously very challenging. And also when we're as a rescue center, we usually deal with the unexpected number and what kind of species that will become coming to our center. So that's pretty much the thing for the animal welfare issue and challenge. And also on the second thing, which is this is very vocal and very important and difficult challenge to address, is the local attitudes. So the local attitudes may affect the maintenance, the overall maintenance in the captivity itself. The local attitudes itself, it's really varied among different socioeconomic condition, cultural, religious group, and it's different in every country, I think. And the local attitudes itself can sometimes be exacerbated by the local traditions that sometimes they may identify the species as the undesirable. I mean, what's the function of having these animals here? What's the function of the trading animals, this kind of animals here? Just waste of time, waste of money and everything. Or solely, there is a community identify the wild animals as a food or the medicine resources. There's also a potential backlash views regarding how the government may allocate the funding for rescuing the animals rather than to human. This is quite focal, especially in the developing countries. And then the only way to overcome this is to do as many as public awareness. So what kind of public awareness we should do is with probably just start with ensuring the tangible benefits of saving wildlife to locals, like increasing their pride of rescuing wildlife, like telling them why we should care for this wildlife. And then by that kind of awareness, we hope that in the future we can nurture respect to nature and animals from the local. And another challenge is about the professional development. Many times we find difficulties in finding the sufficient capacity to handle the captive wildlife in the country. And this is probably where the international experts may come to help building the local capacity and the expert. And rescue center, despite many limitations in terms of the capacity and the knowledge, still they provide roles in education opportunities for other individuals needing the training in care, handling of wildlife, or other topics beyond that. And this is where the internship opportunities to build the local knowledge come. And this is where actually the moment where we should think that what we have, at the very least, it's very helpful for the better nature. This is just the example when I received knowledge from other expertise. And then also this is even with the global animal welfare with Nick here as well, to do the staff capacity building regarding the animal welfare. And other challenge is the veterinary concerns on the wildlife health. The very first is we're very lacking to access any medical information and also references. This is especially the case when we work with many indigenous, unique, and local species to which there has been no reference whatsoever about this species yet. And there is also a very lacking diagnostic technology in the country, especially for those working in a very remote location. And there's also lacking access to the drugs or medicine specific for wildlife due to probably because it's just rarely used and it's not many people familiar with that. There may be an issue with the drug registration procedure, the government. So else as an alternative, we very much using the human and domestic animal medicines. And most incoming animals actually have been exposed to human and domesticated animals. This is especially for the countries like, like Indonesia. Most of the incoming animals, they come from pet animals or from the trade, which is they've been exposed by many conditions that is quite unpredictable and we don't know what they bring. And that's automatically increasing the difficulties to detect the potential disease that those individuals might be exposed to. And obviously, it will pose as an additional risk to the environment when we release the animals. And also, this is pretty much general, that lacking of knowledge about wildlife medicine and disease, not only for the wildlife veterinarian, but also for all the veterinarians and the paramedics or the animal health workers. This is this is a big boundaries that we should fill the gap. We should fill the gap with approach of the One Health. Many times we have the experience when we need to translocate or sending the animals outside from the region, and we have to pass the quarantine. And in the quarantine, they usually not really familiar with the wildlife, so it's a bit, challenging process to make them understand that these animals is quite safe to be transported to. That kind of a thing can be catalyzed using One Health, where we can give more understanding, more education to other workers related to the animal health about the wildlife disease. And also other challenge is because the rescue center built with the hope that individual animals could later help to augment the wild population in a positive way, of course. For example, through the population reinforcement or reintroduction. So we must ensure that the existing ecosystem benefiting from that. And that it comes with the release, obviously have to be done carefully to avoid overpopulation that is very harmful for the conspecific and other sympatric species in the wild and for the welfare of the animal itself. And there's a theory in one journal saying that using confiscated animals to establish free-ranging population deems better than only releasing one individual. And habitat survey itself is, as we know, is seriously really tough work. Not to mention the post-release monitoring is another level of the tough work. So that's pretty much challenge from the ecological or the existing environment. And this is quite interesting challenge about the reality in politics or political realities. So having a strategy of making some animals as a charismatic species, or the one with the status of confiscated wildlife, sometimes could attract the global attention, and it potentially leads to political ramifications as well. And the government agencies usually they tend to be very responsive towards the public opinion, which later drives more of a responsive act. But unfortunately, it's not always benefiting the wildlife. So, for example, this is the case last in 2021, I guess, where there is a politician in Indonesia called Bu Susi. She's a very famous Ministry of Fishery. So she posted in the Twitter asking for help to rescue one of the deer in some island in Pangandaran, that's the West Java. And because she witnessed that this animal is injured, and then it raises so much attention from netizens and also the government eventually, that they come to directly rescue these animals, although there is a conflicting arguments as well behind that. Actually, is it ethical to save this deer because they're in their habitat already, and there is a nature, selection where the less dominant individuals might fight with the alpha male individuals. So there's a question on whether is it ethical to intervene at this moment. So in this case is to show that usually the agencies really doing the responsive act that is still need to be really considered whether is it really can protect the wildlife at the end. And also there's the international pressure or the political agenda that may pose more pressure towards the authorities to force the release of unfit and, in worst case, the behaviorally impaired individuals in the wild. And also there's a pressure, the political pressure as well, sometimes that release of animals and release of the unsuitable animals, and also captivity of the animals that are unreleasable. So because of that political pressure. And it is also found that sometimes the nationalistic attitudes could also prevent sending the non-releasable animals to the better facility outside the country. So the way to overcome this, obviously through the prudent diplomacy, we need to be really really objective, using the professional approach to be able to inform the government or the authorities who's making the final decision. And also the financial challenge is one of a kind. We also know that limited financial resource is the main challenge for most of the rescue centers. This is just for the illustration that the cost for doing the proper medical checkup and food for one orangutan during the quarantine period, approximately $1,000 USD. So it's sometimes raising questions. With that money, how much habitat could be protected? So there's also some of headache as well. And also the way to overcome that is obviously to make sure that the potential donors or funders must be educated about the value of rescuing and saving wildlife through rehabilitation and release, with highlighting the impact from the conservation education and also the animal welfare perspective. And here is where the rescue center can be used as an initial tool to acquire funding for program with greater conservation impact for the wild population. So to recap all the challenges, we see that there is the Sanctuary and Rescue Centers, which is more the welfare-based approach, and also the conservation, it's more like a biological or environmental approach. Sometimes it cannot be denied that there's a potential conflict between saving individuals with a welfare concern or with a context to conservation. So this is the example of this conflicting argument or things between those two are and the introduction of the animals to the overpopulated area, and also the threat of disease carried by rehabilitated animals to the native wild population. But it is still not impossible to coexist. Still, those two are still becoming can still work together through ways such as in-situ and ex-situ link. We now know that there is a one-point approach. So some kind of approach to acknowledge that ex-situ and ex-situ is one set. And also through the preventive medicine efforts, and also through the proper population and habitat survey. So the take-home message from this, given the various and tremendous challenges as an organization working in this kind of field, it is better to acknowledge that we cannot work alone. And also we should lead up the collaborative spirit, and we need to have a list of references or experts in various relevant aspects. And we should acknowledge that what we have and know is already really precious. So the knowledge should be retained in a very neat way. And make everyone in the organization feel included, because we never know that one individual could do a double or triple work because of that multifaceted challenges faced in the rescue center. And also another take-home message is that as an individual working in a sanctuary and animal rescue center, need to be first becoming the compassionate person, or at least be more empathetic towards everything, because we do work with the living beings, with the animals. They cannot speak, and and that's why we need to understand them better. And when it comes to empathy, is really a strong point here. And also be creative, because of many challenge ahead of us, and also becoming passionate and enthusiastic in doing any kind of the work, and be open-minded, always seek for the opportunity, the positive opportunity to grow, and also be culturally sensitive towards others, because again, we deal a lot with the attitudes here. And also relax, you will never work alone. That's because you did something amazing. So that's all. Thank you very much. I think any questions?
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was, I especially liked your take-home messages at the end. But you provided an amazing overview to the rescue process and the challenges of welfare and conservation along every step of the way, and the importance of understanding people's attitudes and donors' attitudes and governmental attitudes. What was really good is you also identified where knowledge gaps exist, and that means there's opportunities to start solving them. And as you said, collaboratively. We do have a couple questions already for you. If you are ready, our first question was, what are the minimal actions you consider before you release an animal? And are there examples of releasing animals simply as there is no capacity to hold them?
Should I just answer it directly, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Answer however you like.
Okay, sorry, can you please repeat that again?
Sorry, yeah, I'll go slower.
Yeah.
What are the minimal actions you consider before you release an animal? And are there examples of releasing animals simply as there is no capacity to hold them?
Okay. This is an interesting question, because actually rescue is the work of everyone. So my suggestion would be to, when you find some animals and you don't have the capacity whatsoever regarding the animals, just ask the expert, do Googling, and see what's in your surrounding. I mean, yeah, I realized that not the organization like the rescue center is not available in any county or any province or any place, but the least you can do is to contact the expert, telling that you found this animals with such of a condition. Then that organization or expert may lead you to further direction on what's next, because releasing animals is again probably Prof. Anani Karis will present it later, how damaging or how tremendous it is to do the random release of the animals. So that would be my suggestion.
Well, and as a follow-up question, we also had someone ask about, can you talk about how you would determine whether an animal is releasable or not?
Okay, so for the first criteria is from the physical health. You make sure the animals is healthy clinically. I mean, from the physical appearance and also internally through the series of diagnostic, tests about the animals, to make sure that they're free from any potential disease that can harm the nature or ecosystem. And also secondly is look from the behavior, because the behavior will allow the animals to be able to survive, to socialize, and to adapt with the wild situation. And also the third one would be is there a place to release or to provide the better condition of the animals itself. Just those three important points.
Right, we just had one more question come in from Sarah Van Herpt at Animals Asia, and she asked, actually on your second point, she asked it as you were answering it, do you actually have developed criteria or behavioral criteria an animal must meet before? And given the challenge that so many species come into wildlife rescue centers, how do you have criteria and understand the behavior of so many different species?
Yeah, that's a persistent challenge, I would say, because we never know what kind of animals that will come to our side. But we already have the system to score the behavior of the raptor species, and also for some of the primate species. But for the other thing, we would just usually consult to another rescue center who has the experience in releasing and make a score or deciding in what stage this kind of animals could be released. That's what we usually do. But the basic parameter would be they are afraid of human, and they can show pretty much their natural behavior. Like, for example, primates, they can climb, birds, they can fly, they can perch, they can prey, and that kind of thing.
Very cool. And we just want to ask one last question before we let you get away. How often in your sanctuary rescue center do you feel you need to make compromises to your activities due to a lack of resources that may impact conservation or welfare? Such as, you want to improve your facilities to hold more animals because more animals are being rescued, yet they may impact on the programs you want to release. And if appropriate, do you have any examples where you've had to make a compromise?
Well, this is a very interesting situation for us as well, because rescue center is basically for the temporary stay. But in the end, there's a case where there are so many unreleasable animals and they have nowhere ready yet to go. I mean, the habitat is not ready yet for them to release. And then that's where we compromise. Well, actually, that's quite a lot, but we have a basic here, like for each type of animals, for example, like the reptiles, for example, the snakes, we would just provide a place where they can stretch their full body. That's the minimum. And also, for example, the birds, they can still perch, walk, fly quite freely. And also, the first thing we would just do is when we think we're not capable of taking care of these animals, we would just better recommend the government to send them to other place, or probably in our site for only the quarantine. Then we would just, during that quarantine period, we would just seek recommendation or seeking place, a better place for them to be in. Then after quarantine, after making sure that they're clear enough, we just sending them to the better place.
Yeah, I think you raise a really interesting point there in that many rescue centres end up being overwhelmed or at capacity with animals that can't be released. And so you're making compromise between taking new animals, developing other programs, and how do we actually start to move animals either into a sanctuary situation so it frees up, as you said, temporary holding for rescues, etc. Which is actually something that Inga is going to talk on in a little while. But that's it for all our questions. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was very thought-provoking, and we've got a lot of points we can follow up there and knowledge gaps that we can fill. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hope you like it.
We loved it.